The Second Punic War
by Abby Moore,
Julia White,
and Emma Zastrow.
How it all began. So, Rome was being pretty hostile to Carthage, and the Barca family, who was significant in Carthage at the time, was angered by that, plus Hannibal was just kind of violent in general. Romans thought that the Carthaginians had broken a pact that they'd already made, and the generals were like really proud, and they're like, okay, like we gotta keep our pride going, keep that up, whatever. And so Rome was making Carthage pay them money, and that was Hannibal's like, that hurts my pride, because they're sensitive and wounded by these attacks on their pride.
There were many different leaders in the Punic Wars, but the major ones were Hannibal and Publius Cornelius Scipio. Side note, the ha 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 at the bottom is just a pun. This person wasn't real. But now you may ask, who is Hannibal?
Well, Hannibal was born in 247 BCE. After the war, he successfully ran for political office and was involved with the corporate world. He, in history, was regarded as one of the strongest military leaders and was just a really big idol. In 218 BC, the war began. Hannibal attacked Rome and won easily, completely destroying Rome's army.
The Battle of Lake
Trasimene
was another win for Hannibal. He used a turning movement strategy, which means attacking from behind and getting the opponent out of their position. One of the unique parts of this war was that the Romans used this Fabian strategy to defeat Hannibal, which was different because it avoided, the usual attacking from the front kind of thing, and instead sneaked around to wear down the enemy by fighting a bunch of little battles instead of one big one, so that you could gradually wear down the big opponent.
Well, since the Punic War happened a really long time ago, technology is kind of a relative term. So the elephants that Hannibal used were actually quite revolutionary, and I would think to be considered a technology of the war.
Another prominent battle of the war was the Battle of
Cannae or Cannae,
where Rome was defeated by Hannibal. They actually initiated the battle, but they didn't win.
The Battle of
Zama
officially ended Hannibal's winning streak, and it was fought around mid-October in 202 BC, and actually was a major Roman victory. It was one of the first Roman victories, and this became the turning point in the battle for Rome, because they eventually, spoiler alert, ended up winning the war.
We've been talking about all of these battles of the Second Punic War between Rome and Carthage, but you may be wondering, who actually fought in these?
Since this was such an intense war, it was kind of a free-for-all for whoever could become a soldier. Elders, vagrants, freedmen, slaves, convicts, whatever. However, Roman Order knights were the only ones who could be senior officers because, we had to have some good leadership going on.
The soldiers of Carthage, on the other hand, were just, your regular guys. We've got property-owning farmers and artisans, just regular old town citizens. They weren't as, uppity as the Romans over there. Here we have your average Roman soldier looking fast and fierce and fresh in his armor.
The Carthaginian and Roman armies were fairly large. In the Second Punic War, there were about 4,200 people.
Each army was divided up into 3 lines of people that made a mana pole. Each line was divided by experience, youngest in the front because we can spare them, and the older, more experienced people in the back.
Here we've got a map just to give you kind of the general idea of what the area of the war looked like. Obviously, since the war was between Rome and Carthage, it took place in those areas. But, the different battles took place kind of in different areas of Italy, as you can see in the slide. And there was even one battle that ended up in northern Africa. You may be wondering, what kind of weapons did the armies use? Like, what supplies did they need? Well, not these.
The supplies that the armies used are pretty much what you'd expect, the only kind of surprising thing here being elephants, although we mentioned that previously. There is also food and water being important because you need it to survive.
Castra were the forts that the soldiers hid out in during the war. Generally speaking, they were either squares or rectangles, squares being ones that held a single legion and rectangles held multiple.
Soldiers also lived inside the castra during the war, and they were strong buildings because they wanted to protect the soldiers, and a lot of architectural skill went into this, like tons of math, geometry, all that sort of thing to make sure that they were strong enough to protect the soldiers.
Ah, the war is finally over, and here we have 3 symbols of victory. Roger Federer, a world-renowned tennis player winning at Wimbledon, Richard Hatch, the first ever winner of the reality TV series Survivor, and players pouring Gatorade on their coaches, I think that's a sports thing, of victory.
So, since the war is finally over, Carthage lost and Rome won.
Woo!
Go Rome!
Yeah!
Some people thought that Rome wouldn't get back on its feet. They thought that it would just die. But nevertheless, Rome continued to thrive as a civilization and advance its navy as well as Carthage. But Hannibal, on the other hand, left his life of violence and settled to corporate business, but then eventually committed suicide.